Welcome to the My Personal Football Coach Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, Episode 14, Ask the Experts, with Beale and Danny Searle.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another show. Today I'm really happy to presenting the second of our two podcast special, Ask the Experts. And today we've got two cracking experts, two real specialists and proven player developers. We've got Danny Searle, who was until very recently head of coaching at West Ham's famous academy, and also Beale, who was till very recently the assistant manager of Sao Paulo and former Liverpool and Chelsea coach. So really privileged to have two top quality proven player developers on the show. Excited to see what they've got to say. I mean, this is really what the podcast's all about for me. When I started up was part of it was a selfish thing about wanting to learn and develop myself. So really honoured and humbled that such experienced, proven player developers come on the show and share their experiences, and people who have been there and done that. So it's really fantastic. It's a really good show. I know you're going to enjoy it. Remember MyPersonalFootballCoach.com, as well as having our online technical training program, the Dynamic Ball Mastery program aimed at players. We've also got the Coaches Pass. So if you're looking for some inspiration, some ideas about ball mastery and 1v1 coaching tactics and lesson plans, try it out. It's growing. We've got users in 20 different countries, so that's going really strong. And we've got also a tremendous amount of new podcasts coming up with some really great people coming on, so that's great. So lots going on, and without further ado, let's get into the show. So welcome to a very special show. Today I've got two of the best proven player developers in the game. Extremely proud to have Danny Searle and Beale here. Danny, how you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, Saul. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Mickey. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Hope you're both well. Fantastic.
So good to have you here. So we'll just start off with some of the questions we've had in from our listeners. First one is, 14 to 18s, train the way you play. If all drills have to be high tempo, yes or no, and when, and how do you divide it or fit it into a training day or week? Danny, do you want to go first with that one?
Yeah, I think that when you're putting in training week together, you're preparing players to play in a game. So as much as possible, you want your training sessions to be high tempo and match realistic. But I think Mickey would agree, it's really hard to replicate the game. So when you're devising your practices and you're putting things together, you're trying to create scenarios where individual players, which I think is one of the biggest things you need to work on, get specific practice on what they might have to encounter in a match situation. So there is obviously a lot based around the team. But during the course of the week, as Mick will tell you, when regards to first team taking players off you and whatnot, there's practices where it's more individual and it's more specific to the positions.
Excellent. Well, Mickey, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with Danny's points. I think that there's a lot of variables. Obviously, when you're planning your week in youth development, you need to make sure that you have a really nice mix, and that you have the small spaces for the ability to evade people and outplay, but you also need the big spaces so that you can get used to the size of the actual pitch you're going to play on at the weekend, so it's not a shock to your system. And I think that's difficult in youth development. You can be really organised, but there can be so many variables of players taken away from you, and maybe that you don't have the players in your group in terms of numbers. But I think also a big aspect of the question you asked is, obviously, if you train the way you play, always at this intensity of English football, where is the opportunity to maybe practice and be playful and just practice your craft in terms of your skill and your ability and your ability to improvise. So I think that really you've got to make sure that you give the kids the opportunity to do everything in the training, and therefore planning is very, very important. But it would be silly of me to answer that I thought that everybody has the perfect environment. I'm sure that every coach up and down the country has times where, you know, you plan and then that plan's thrown out the window. That's the great art of being a youth coach, of able to be adaptable. I think that how you communicate with the players can set the tone for that and allow some space for playfulness as well. It's setting the boundaries of training early, I think, with your players.
So obviously both you guys are involved at the top end of football, and obviously it's a bit different from everybody else, but I mean you guys have access to those players, you know, pretty much every day, if you like. So I mean, so how does that look? Because, you know, it's, you know, we obviously know we need to get the players hours. I mean, it's not realistic, is it? Well, is it realistic to be playing games the whole time? Out of, you know, if you've got boys 2 hours a day or more, you know, is it you know, unproductive actually to play games the whole time, through that whole time? Obviously, from my experience, I know that, you know, working in a high intensity environment, you know, sometimes good to drop down a little bit, focus on the things, and then go back into the game situations. Who's Danny? You want to answer that?
Yeah, I think Mick makes a great point about balance, and you have to give every player an opportunity to want for a better word, make mistakes and fail to a certain degree, and sometimes that has to be in a game environment, whether it be small-sided or 11v11, and other times it's going to be really small. And Mick alluded to sort of beating players and learning their sort of their tricks and of their trade. So, I mean, it's a real specific position sometimes that you have to put the players into to really hone, you know, those techniques and those skills. And when you marry that up with the small-sided games and the 11v11 matches, that's hopefully when you'll see them sort of bloom, if you know what I mean. But the balance has to be right, and you have to make sure that you give them those opportunities to really hone their craft. So
what about, Danny, say, for instance, you know, you've got you know, you've had a winger, for instance, who's been struggling with his final ball in games. I mean, how do you approach that with that individual in terms of, you know, his week? How do you structure his program to make sure he'd get opportunities to refine that particular thing within that team environment?
Well, both myself and Mick will be fortunate that we'll have access to the players pretty much all day, every day. So, I mean, I try not to take too much away from the actual training where they get social aspects and psychological aspects from working with the team. There's always individual sessions that we put on, whether that be with a player by himself, so he's just really practicing his technique, adding in then some pressure, some opposition. You might bring some other players in that might have other needs they're working on, might be dealing with crosses, might be defending in 1v1 situations. And it's really trying to hone that plan for that player, that individual plan, so that he's got specific targets that he can hit. And if end product is one of those, then it's down to us as the coaches to create that environment where he gets an opportunity to practice, make mistakes, sometimes self-correct, sometimes correct with the help of the coaches. But it's really crucial that the plan's in place for that player throughout the whole week.
So, Mickey, what do you reckon then in terms of, say, you know, if you're looking on the flip side, you're looking at coaches who maybe only got players once or twice a week, and they've got that same problem, what would you recommend for those guys if they, you know, they don't necessarily have the luxury of having the players every day? How can they, you know, go to try and solve a problem like that when you've got limited time with the players?
Well, I think when you're working with anyone in a team sport, there's two different types of training, isn't there? There's you, so it's improving your level of identity as an athlete in the sport that you're in, and then there's the we element of how you fit that identity into a team. So I think they're the two things that you train every day. I think you have to create an environment, so you have to almost train or manage an environment that is positive, that people want to be involved in, that's social, that people love coming to, so it's infectious. And then the two things you're coaching are very specific to you. What do you need to improve? How are you improving it? That's vital every day. And they're the little conversations. People think that's very, very complex, but it's not really. It's a conversation over breakfast. It's a walk to the pitch. It's during the drinks break in a session, just reminding someone of who they are and just remind them to keep doing the things that they're good at, or maybe remind them of an area that they want to work on. That's a lot easier as the players get older, because they have a bit more of an identity than they do when they're young, where it's much more a broader spectrum. But it's then taking that, you know, that very personal situation about developing yourself And then it's like the we. How do you make that effective inside the team? So it's a balance of the two. But for me, every day is just balancing that. Is what the players need and what they want. So the players need to improve certain aspects individually, but they want to play a game. So it's trying to marry the two together. And the best coaches just have a knack of doing that. And I think that's a big part of coach education, communication, how to communicate, how to inspire, and then getting the players' wants with their needs linked together. I think if you can do that in a session, then you are an outstanding coach, in my opinion.
I suppose that's the tricky bit, right? Is that, you've got kids for a little time, you want to be playing as much game as possible, get them opposed, get them having fun, but then, how do you marry that with actually trying to address that young, that player's individual technical deficiencies, if you want to call it like that. What would you think, what any other things you could do, Danny, to try and remedy that, so if you've only got the players in a short time?
I think if the environment, like Mick alluded to the environment, if the environment's right, the players want to deal with those situations anyway. They'll come up with their own little challenges that they want to work on, and if they feel free enough to speak to you and be honest with you about where they're actually currently at with their development, then you as a coach, it becomes easier, because when you're dealing with players and they have fear and they're worried, you find it really difficult to engage them. I mean, Mick alluded to engaging the players and making them feel like they want to have fun and enjoy themselves. I mean, that's where the environment's created by the coach. And I think that with the new style of coach that's coming out with the Advanced Youth Awards and the new coaching styles, a lot of emphasis on psychology and on the social aspects, children becoming more free to kind of self-correct and learn. So it all comes down to environment. I 100% agree with Mick on that. If the environment's not right, then you're going to struggle no matter how good the player is, to be honest.
Well, I mean, are you sort of, you talk about self-correct there. Are you happy for players to self-correct? I mean, look, you've worked at one of the best academies in world football in terms of, their player development track record. I mean, so how long do you give a player to self-correct, and when do you, step in and say, look, where can these are something we can do to help you do that, addressing a technique? I
think that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and patience is a real key with these players. And sometimes you watch sessions and young coaches, which we all were there. I was there. I definitely made mistakes like this when I was first starting out. Is as soon as you saw something, you stop the session and you want to talk to that player and you want to help him, not because you want to show off, but you actually genuinely want to help the player. But there are times when, you know what, let him make the mistake, watch him a couple more times, and I've seen it more and more as I've been involved in the game. A lot of these players sort it out themselves. And then obviously if it gets to a stage where he's repeatedly making the same mistake over and over again, then I think that's more of an individual thing, where you might have a chat with him, like Mick said, those important drinks breaks, those little walks around the training ground, lunch, whenever you've got access to the player, you can have little chats there. We're fortunate that we've got a fantastic analytical system now where players can watch all their training sessions, they can watch all their games, and it's a great tool for them to use. So, but patience is a real key. So you'll be surprised the amount of players that actually, they kind of know the mistake, and within themselves, they've probably got the attributes to correct it.
I think that's a great point. Looking back, when I was a younger coach as well, that was one of the things I first noticed about academy football when I first went in, was that actually, the importance of just letting them play, let the ball keep going, rather than stop and starting. Ball running time being one of the key things and most important factors in that level of football. All right, lads, just quickly on to the next one then. So look, you guys both work at at the top end of the spectrum, if you like, and have done so. What would you talk about? How much time do you spend on technique and how much time do you spend on tactics in your week, or is it? Would you say, if you were going to summarise that? That one to Mickey first.
I think it's like, it depends on the age group, but each club will have like a philosophy, and a philosophy is not a formation, it's like preferences for playing the game. And so I think they come out, that becomes a bit like a coaching vocabulary that comes out in your sessions without you necessarily having to work on it. Even with Liverpool under 23s, we never really worked in enough in 11v11 situation because of the size of the group. It was more about fine-tuning the individual. But even when we played a 5v5 game, we had some real clear ideas and our preference in trying to play, and the type of passes we'd play and the type of movements that we would make to receive, or just in our aggression to counter pressing, because both managers there in Brendan Rodgers and Jurgen Klopp were very much onto that. And it was the same at Chelsea before that, and now Sao Paulo. Like, every day is not a tactical day, but even within, say, 5v5 or 66 possession, the preferences for the club or for the coach at that time in terms of the style that he wants would come out in your coaching points and your coaching vocabulary. And then it's about coaching each player to make them more effective in it. So I think that in terms of coaching technique, I think at every single age group there's a need for isolation, because I think with isolation becomes a thinking time. And I think that's really important. And I love that quote from Michael Jordan about, about practicing. And, you can take 100 shots, but if you take 100 shots the wrong way, you're just getting better at doing something wrong. So I think, David Beckham wouldn't stay outside taking free kicks or working on how to strike the ball if work in isolation wasn't important. And I think that's how you fall in love with a football when you're young. And that's what I see here in Brazil, why people fall in love with playing football, because it's very much starts with a boy and a football, very simple. And then I think as you get older and you get in more of a professional environment, of course it has to all link together. And again, I think a hell of a lot of coaching comes down to communication, and then the use of football as a simple game, not a complex game. The use of simple rules like the real game is, and not veering too far away from it, but being fantastic in how you probe players and how you question them and the situations you put them in. So I'd love to see coach education go down the route of communication rather than the route of tactical information, because we've done that for a number of years, and it's not got us very far, in my humble personal opinion.
Lovely. So, Danny, what about you, mate? Technical and tactical work through the week. How would you balance that? And what's the averages if you were going to stereotype your work?
I mean, to be honest with you, tactical, I think it's almost like we kind of alluded to it a little bit with Mick, that it's kind of becoming extinct a little bit, tactics. It's more about game understanding, because what our jobs have always been is to try and produce a player that's going to play for our first teams. And Mick's alluded to two managers that he's worked under. West Ham have had several managers. Was in my time at the club, and Charlton before that. And you start to talk tactics, you could be leading the players down a bit of a dodgy path, to be honest with you, because what you see as tactics might not be what the first team manager wants. So it's about understanding when to press, when not to press, making sure they're getting inside the pitch to stop the players from playing through essential areas. It's the intensity, it's the type of work that's involved with. It's about taking on responsibilities, knowing your roles and responsibilities. So you might be playing against, a very quick winger if you're a fullback, and he likes to come inside the pitch, and how you're going to make him work with that specific player. And that's when it breaks down, it becomes more individual. And like Mick's saying, obviously Mick's fortunate that he's been working with the first team environment at Sao Paulo, and that probably is a lot more prevalent. But for a basis of a week, I mean, we try to utilise every opportunity we get. So there's obviously a lot of scepticism in the moment about sports science in the game. I'm fortunate that the sports scientists I've worked with have been very open to making sure that our warm-ups and whatnot are football specific. So we do a lot of technical work within that. Sometimes opposed, sometimes unopposed, sometimes with pressure, sometimes without pressure. So then when we get into more possession-based sessions, small-sided games, whether you're doing a phase of play, functional practice, however you want to term it these days. And then it's more about the understanding. And when you're doing, whether you're doing 3v3 or 5v5, 7v7 or 11v11, as Mick said earlier, you kind of try to get your core principles out of how you, as a club within your philosophy, feel that the players should be implementing those responsibilities.
And so what's your thought, Danny, then on isolation and doing technical work in isolation? Obviously, like what Mickey talked about, it's a big subject at the current time.
I was fortunate. I saw a presentation recently in regards to a guy called Joe Edwards. I'm sure you both know him at Chelsea, and he did a study out in America about the NBA and about the NFL, and how individual and specific their training is. Now, obviously, football is a variable sport. It's a lot more variable than American football and basketball. A lot of set plays are played within those games, but there's definitely value for practice in isolation, because I've not seen a documentary or read an autobiography of a super player or one of the world's best players without them saying about how much they practice by themselves. And there's something to be said for that. And we all want the decision-making options, and we all want those within the game, and we understand that. But a player taking a bag of balls out after a training session when everyone's gone home and working on a specific technique that he wants to hone and really make a super strength, if you want, I don't see there's any harm in that. And if a coach can go out and assist that, whether that's just to be served in and whatnot, I think that the players can only benefit from those situations.
I think you guys, as well as myself, we're lucky to work in those environments when we've seen those elite players, and so we can understand that these are the sorts of things they do anyway. Like you say, it's a logical, common sense thing, isn't it? You see the guys after training practicing ball striking, or like Mickey, you mentioned David Beckham whipping the ball. This is what I think people do. So it's just like, I think you guys allude to, is about having a balance, isn't it? And knowing, how to mix it and have a real balance of those about your approach. Okay, fantastic. Let's move on to the next question then. This sort of leads on to that. What's your thoughts on constant practices that help with triggers and then into small-sided games, which leads to varied and random practices? That's to you, Danny, first.
It's a real difficult one, because, the kind of new methodology around coaching is all about being involved and multiple decision-making opportunities and making sure the players can think for themselves and problem solve, which I'm fully behind that. But then you look at Antonio Conte's Chelsea team this season and how practical they probably were in everything they did. They had a real understanding of every little role that they had within the team. And when you speak to the staff at Chelsea, which I'm sure Mick has done over the past year, he's very, very, very fixed on repetitive practice, a lot of the time unopposed. These are the triggers we want to do. So it's hard to dismiss that. Me personally, I kind of like it to be a little bit more free, in the sense of opportunities to make decisions and to problem solve and know that, I've got to deal with this situation myself as the player, and not that the trigger situations are not relevant, but I think you can get those out within your small-sided games and within your possessions, whether you pull the player out and you can have a chat with him on the side whilst the session's going on and make him maybe look at what's going on, have a little word walk within the session. I think that helps sometimes. When you're actually in the session, you can actually start to see where the players see what the players see themselves. And obviously with the use of video analysis, you can really start to hone in on, right, okay, what's happened here? Well, the centre midfielder's got his head down. He can clearly about to strike the ball. Well, there's your trigger, isn't it? There's your time to react. Start to adjust where your start position or where you want to be. So, for me, it's best to be done within the small-sided games and within the possession practices, where they've actually got to make decisions based on the here and now, as opposed to trying to predict what's going to happen in the game.
And Mickey, what's your thoughts on that?
I'm worried about the long words in coaching, if I'm honest, gents. I really worry about them, because obviously I've been in the game for quite a while as a junior player in an academy, and then obviously at the 2 or the 3 clubs that I've worked at, and long words like they confuse me. So I wonder if they confuse the younger coaches out there, and the words of trigger and different types of words that the FA are coming out with now. And I haven't been through these courses with the FA in the last couple of years, so I'm not up to speed with them. But I would just say that it's really important that when you're dealing with a kid, now if you're a parent, and I think when you become a parent, I'm not saying that everybody should go out and get their wife or girlfriend pregnant overnight. I think but when you become a parent, you definitely have a different view, and it does push you on again as a coach, because you just look at your children and you think, well, what do they need? And what do I want from my son or my daughter going into a club or going into a sport and being coached by somebody? And I think what you want is you want it to be a little bit personal, and you want that person to be very positive, and you want that person to be very encouraging, and you want that person to be careful when they give feedback, because kids take things very literal. And I think that a lot of coach education is very easy to go on the internet now and see a Pep Guardiola or a Conte or part of their session, or a Simeone or any of these famous coaches now, Pochettino, Jurgen Klopp. But there's not enough education out there for people that are working with younger developing players and how to bring them on. So we see these sessions at the end, and it's very important that, you know, Conte's in a situation at Chelsea and then Premier League managers where they have to organise very, very talented football players. Talented football players that if they receive a ball with pressure from the side or from behind, can handle it, because they're worth millions of pounds and they're in their mid-20s or even older in most cases, and they're international football players. They are the top of the top. So we can't look too closely at that for how to develop developing players between the ages of 14 and 21. I think we need to look specifically at that and try to marry the two as the players get closer to it. But the most it'll always be for me that if you plan well and if you're lucky enough to have staff or an assistant and you split yourself, you don't try to be Superman, then I think you can get around the players. And I think the younger the players, in most cases, people will say more difficult. I say more easy, because the spectrum is wider. You know, you're teaching a bigger base, therefore it's not as specific as it is as you get in a professional club between the ages of maybe 14 and 21, and now you have to be really specific, otherwise this boy is not going to fulfill his dream. People talk about fulfilling potential, but I think it's the adults that have a big part to play in terms of opening the doors to potential. I think when you're dealing with a young kid, it's very much about their dream and how you can help them towards it. And so I think it's the relationships are huge. I think that's a player will take anything from a coach in terms of advice and guidance if the relationship's right. And so I think that's huge. I just worry about the long words, gents. You know, I don't understand them, and yet you'd think someone that worked in 2 or 3 very, very good professional clubs would understand all these concepts. I don't. It's very confusing for me.
So okay, moving on then, and that. So here's an interesting question. Is it true that academies only focus on the top 3 players in each group? This is something I've heard ex-parents have asked me, actually. Over to you, Mickey, that first.
Well, each academy to themselves, but in the 2 academies that I've worked in, I think in terms of that aspect, it's not working towards the best 3 players. I think that changes. You know, if you're working on defending one day, is that different to when you're working on attacking? If you're working on passing and receiving, I think that's a quote that or a saying that's maybe been misread. I think what you try to do is you try to push the players on. So you try to work to the ability of the player at the top end of the group. And you try to set challenges for all the players that are slightly above their level to push them on. There was a lovely thing that Alex Inglethorpe used to say, that a player needs, he needs 25% outside his comfort zone where he's struggling, but he also needs 25% where it's underneath, where he can have lots of success. And then the 50%, the big bulk of their work, needs to be at the relevant level. And when we speak to ex-players, like Michael Owen used to love playing for his school and his county and his district, because it enabled him lots of opportunities to shoot and score goals, and all different types of goals. And then obviously when he would have his game with Liverpool, the level would go up a little bit. And if he played up an age group, the level would go up a little bit again. So it's a really interesting thing, this, about challenges and that. But that wasn't the case at Chelsea or Liverpool, and it's not the case here in the academy at Sao Paulo. I think that in everything that you do, you try to set it just above the level of the players, because kids love challenges. We all do as people. We love to challenge ourselves.
Danny, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's easy for parents to look at the situation at clubs and think that there's 3 players that or 4 players or 2 players, whatever happens to be in that age group, that get favoured, if you want, or get a focus on them. But like Mick's saying about the challenges, what's right for one is not right for another. And if you've got a boy who's very, very comfortable, if not finds it too easy within his own age group, and for him to be challenged and to give him his best opportunity, he needs to train with another age group, or he needs to play up in another age group, then that's for that specific individual. I'm sure there's been cases that you've all come across that where actually the player playing down has been the one who's been the most successful of that age group. And now some clubs, the culture would be, if he's being put down in a younger age group, it must mean he's not doing very well. Well, no, it's specific to that individual. And I think the clubs have to be realistic that the percentage of players that actually are going to go on to play play Premier League football is very low. So when you have got a player that needs to be pushed, they need to push him. It's the right thing to do for that player. And the bottom line is you've got to try and give exposure to these children so that people can see them, see what they're able to do and what they're capable of doing. So the first team managers start to take notice. And now that player might be at 16 because he's the top of the bunch. It might not be till he's 22, 23. So it's a real hard one, and I do understand where parents are coming from with that. But I think if you actually really got involved in the meetings around the clubs, you'd see that there is plans and there is work being done on every individual, and whether they're perceived to be at the lower end of the group or the top end of the group, I think that everyone would want those players to progress and get better and succeed, whether it's at their club or another club. So I do see the issue, but I don't think it's like that, not in the clubs I've worked at.
Well, what do you think, Danny, then? You talked about playing up there. Obviously, as you know, this is seen by many of the parents as like the holy grail, rightly or wrongly. They see, my kid's playing up, then obviously this means, then the parents measure themselves basically on other players playing up and stuff like that. Obviously, as you know, in playing up is not always the be on end all. What other ways are there to challenge players apart from playing up? Because as you know, that might not be the right thing for a certain player.
It depends what you're challenging them with, and are you challenging them technically and tactically? Are you trying to do a psychological challenge? Is it a social challenge? Are you challenging them physically? And that's where I always revert back to that, to the individual. What does that actual player need? So if it's a player who is struggling socially, you might actually play him down and say, right, you're captain today. You need to lead the group. You need to talk to the group. You need to organise the set pieces. You need to maybe talk to the players in the change room before, after the game, at half times. If it's a psychological test, you might put him in an area where he's taken out of his comfort zone. So it's a real difficult one, because a lot of the time when you've got a player who has potential, the best way to really challenge him is to get him working with players of an equal standard, if not better. But then recognising obviously that extend and consolidate, bringing him back down. So there's multiple ways in which you can challenge a player in training, games. You have to have a specific plan for that player and know what his strengths and weaknesses are, because depending on what you're actually challenging him with, that will massively depend on whether it's a play up, play in his own age group, play down. You might leave him out, you might challenge him, see what he's like. How does he react to being left out of a session, left out of a game? So there's lots of different ways and means of doing it.
Mickey, what's your thoughts on that? And also, Mick, thinking about, if you're a grassroots coach and you don't have the option to play up and play down, what could you do?
I think that one thing that I always thought in the academy is like goalkeepers. And I will come back to the question. In terms of goalkeepers, they get to the big goals too soon. So you have this lovely little goalkeeper that's brilliant in mini soccer, and all of a sudden he gets to the age of 12 and he's been this massive goal, and all of a sudden it's like every shot is impossible to save, and it's very hard for a kid to understand that and take that in and remain confident. So I think that you want a good goalkeeper to take command of his area, and you want him to be a big personality. You look at the best goalkeepers that have ever played the game, they sort of control the back four. Now, that's very hard socially for a boy of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 within his peer group. And also a goalkeeper's development is later than an outfield player. So I've always thought goalkeepers should play down and should get to the bigger goal a little bit slower than what they do at the moment, and also at the same time build the necessary social skills that are essential to play that position. So I always think that. I have nothing against players playing up or down. I just think that we need players that are solution based. So therefore, if you have a big player playing against a small player, so if it was me and you, Saul, and I was an early birth or an early developer and you're a late developer, Now in the confrontation or the 1v1 duel, I'm not really thinking Saul. I know I can boulder my way past you with maybe a little bit more power and strength, a little bit more speed in this moment, without maybe having great mechanics. I don't have to think. I'm not solution based. So always when I was interested to when I was back at Chelsea and was selecting players, my big thing challenge to the scouts and coaches were like, what's he good at and why is he good at it? So if you gave me a young boy that you said, scored a lot of goals, and he was always scoring from outside the box, and I started to look at the key facts around the player, of his date of birth, of his physical size, or whatever, where he was in his maturity, I would probably be able to tell you without actually watching the boy too much whether that was circumstances or was a quality. And I was very interested in the smaller, later developers because I think they're solution based. So you as a smaller player coming up against me, you might not be able to outstrength me or outrun me. So then you have to be very clever with how you manipulate the ball, or maybe use the second or third player to pass and move to outplay me. So I think that's it. I think they're the challenges you're looking for. I think if you have a player that's getting by on physicality rather than quality, then you have to make a judgment that is that physical quality is going to stay with him for the rest of his life. Is he just a natural athlete, or will players catch him up in time? And if you make that decision that you think players will catch him up in time, then you have to challenge him. There has to be someone else in the group that you can challenge him and put him up against, so that he does become solution based. And maybe you need to keep challenging this player in other areas of his game to take him away from these dominant forces that you know are not going to last the test of time. But I think that comes with experience, and that's why I think young coaches need mentors around them. My big thing for grassroots coaches is more difficult for them. And if I'm a grassroots coach in this moment in time, I'm not veering too far away from the game, if I'm honest, Dan. I think that, if you don't know, don't make out you do know and confuse the confusables. I think young kids are can be very confused about football, but when they come to your training, you have a big advantage because they're there because they want to play football. And that doesn't mean that's the same for a grassroots player as it is for a first team player. But if you're in charge of a grassroots player now, then the kids are not playing enough outside their houses every single day. So when they come to you, give them time to play the game. And maybe just influence them with your communication or the circumstances you put them in. But I worry about grassroots coaches going down the route of drills and practices, because if you only have an hour or 2 hours a week and that's the only active time these kids have physically, don't waste it talking.
Nice one, fantastic. So moving on then, how do you coach and introduce pressing? What age? What is steps of doing that? Where would you start? What's the process of going along to that? Obviously, it's a big thing now recently. Mickey, do you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, I think you have to understand, we're talking about pressing, obviously we're talking about defending or a desire to go and win the ball back. And then you have to, whenever you talk about defending, you have to talk about space. So what space are you trying to protect? Are you trying to protect space behind, or are you trying to protect space in the middle, or are you trying to press further forward? So I think them things, it's important. If you're talking about individual pressing, then the best attitude you can give for any real young kid is, if you're the nearest to the ball, go to press it. But I think then as you get older and join into a team game, that's not necessarily the case. You don't go and press on your own, you press together. Or if one player presses, the next one goes, he pulls the train and then pulls the link to the next carriage, the next player to follow behind. So I think you can coach the mentality, which is a great mentality, that if you lose the ball, to react, or if you're the closest to the ball, to go to try to win it back. I think you can coach that from the beginning. And when I say the beginning, when kids first play a game, okay, nearest to the ball, go and try and get it back. And that can be like a positive behaviour you're trying to look for in players, a desire or a mentality you're trying to create. And it becomes, it's a difficult question because it becomes more complex as you get older, because defending is much more about space and what space you want to protect and what and where you maybe desire to win the ball back than anything else. But I honestly believe there's lots of benefits behind when the kids first start, teaching them to react. I think reactions, and we say the word transition, don't we? But actually just reacting, like a light switch, turning on and off. There should be no delay between having the ball and losing the ball. I think they're qualities you can teach young kids from the ages of 8, 9, 10, 11 when they first play the game. I think that's just a behaviour you're looking for in people.
Danny, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I don't think there is an age limit on it. At the end of the day, the boys want the ball. When your team's playing, you want the ball, and it's a real easy habit to generate. And I think that's the key to it, is making sure it's a habit. It's something that becomes ingrained in them, that when they lose it, they want to get it back. And as Mick's alluded to earlier, you kind of, as they start to get through the system and the higher level they play and the better they become, you can really start to hone those skills down on the actual decision of when I can press and when I can't press. Are we in a good enough position? With regards to actually starting to instill it in the players, you can do that almost from day one, because any little kid you watch running around the park with his friends, as soon as he loses the ball, he wants to get the ball back. Now, if you praise that and really instill that kind of habit into him, that when I haven't got it, I want it back, then the rest becomes quite easy. Because as I'm sure you'll both agree, whenever you come across players that you're really struggling to engage and motivate, it generally comes down to the psychology side of them, the psychological side. They lack desire, they lack determination, they lack that willingness to want to do things. Now, if you can really kind of enforce that at a young age and reinforce that at a young age, you're onto a winner, because the honing of the decision making becomes a lot easier when they get older.
And so, I mean, when has that changed, Danny? I mean, obviously, we obviously work a lot on that in the younger age groups. When I was there, about winning the ball back, being tenacious, trying to get the ball back within, some clubs say within 6 seconds or whatever. I mean, when has that changed though to a more mindful type of pressing, when you're working pressing as a team in 2s or 3s, and what age would you recommend starting that, and what's the process of introducing that?
Well, again, I don't think you can actually put an age on it. It goes down to the individual player, because you'll have groups where there's natural leaders within the group, and they set a real tempo and a standard to whether it's a training session, whether it's the game, and they do that at a young age because it seems to be like an inherent trait that they have. So you can almost utilise those players to bring the other players on, but what age that is, I don't think you can really put a finger on that until you see the group of players that you've got and know the personalities that you've got. Then I think when you're starting to look at, okay, I've got 2 or 3 leaders within this group and they really understand how to go and win the ball back, and socially they communicate quite well with their teammates, and they can really start to put some pressure on the opposition straight away with some organisation. That's when you can really look at maybe practicing that within sessions and actually talking about, okay, now is this a good time to press? But to say, like, whether it's a 10s, 11s, 14s, 16s, 18s, I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on the individuals and the personalities within the group.
Okay, excellent. So that moves us on nicely to our next question, sort of associated. With such an emphasis on creative players being produced, are coaches ignoring limiting defensive development? Do you want to go ahead with that one, Danny, first?
I would say 100% there's an element that there's coaches who kind of completely dismiss defensive sides. I've watched sessions over the past 4 or 5 years and mentored coaches myself, which I'm sure you both have had to do as well. And I've never seen them put a defensive session on or make a comment on defending. I don't think it's about really emphasising that, right, this session is going to be just about us defending, but it's about making sure that players understand. We talked about pressure, winning the ball back, how we're going to do that, what kind of characteristics you need to do that. Okay, you need to be brave, you need to want to get it back, you need to have desire, you need to have determination, you need to be willing to hurt your body, because at times you look at the John Terrys of the world and the Rio Ferdinands, these players are willing to put their bodies on the line to defend. And highlight these characteristics, and again, you can start doing that at a really young age and start to implement these social and psychological elements of the game into the players, so they understand the needs within it to actually be a defender, because you're all defenders at the end of the day. I mean, it's a cliche, I know, but when you haven't got the ball, you're all defending, aren't you?
So a couple of things more there, Danny. Just how much of your week do you split between defensive and attacking work? And then also, do you think there's an element of, you get that natural defender, get those people who naturally have that inclination and some that necessarily don't, and then can you coach that?
Yeah, I mean, natural defender. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have worked with a lad called Declan Rice over the last few years. Mick will know him. He come to West Ham from Chelsea. The boy's a natural defender, and I do use that word with a little bit of caution, because that hasn't come easy to him. Just because he's a natural doesn't mean that he's actually just suddenly become this fantastic defender. He's had to work very hard at it. But when I say natural, I'd say more his characteristics, his persona on the pitch, his desire to want to get the ball back. And I think he would be a naturally good defender, whether he was a centre-back, centre midfielder or centre-forward, because he just has a desire to want to get the ball back. I mean, with regards to the other sort of side of it, you're kind of looking towards... When you've got a player who is standing on the ball, wants to be creative, you have to understand that there's not many managers in the world that are going to let you stand on the pitch and do nothing. So they have to understand that when we lose the ball, there has to be a real work ethic, whether it's for a team, whether it's to actually try and win the ball back yourself, whether it's to drop in, whether it's to fill in a position because someone else has gone to the press. And when you're balancing up your working week, I think it's almost got to be 50-50, and you can do that within every session. You can have a defensive element in every possession. You can have a defensive element with every small-sided game that you do. You can have a defensive element in almost every technical session that you do, because as soon as you put opposition in there, you have a defender. And I was fortunate enough as a coach at West Ham called Paulo. He's a defender himself, and I was one of those coaches who was guilty of, I loved putting on a possession and focusing on the fact that we've made 25 passes and how wonderful we all are. Well, then you actually start to break it down. The reason you probably made 25 passes is because the defending's not been anywhere good enough. And one of my key messages within my sessions is the tempo of the session is not set by the team that are in possession. The tempo of the session is set by the team that's defending. Because if they're not doing it properly, then you're not going to get a good tempo.
Mickey, your thoughts on that? Are we neglecting the defensive side, and how much time would you work on that in your week?
It's not glamorous, and every coach wants to be loved by the players they work with. So it's it's something that can be lost. But I think you've got to make defending fun. I think you've got to. You're still in my next blog post, by the way. Here, so you killed me a little bit, Saul. But I'm going to continue.
That's what I like to hear. Yeah.
Basically, mate. A big thing that I do now is whenever I join or receive a new team in the academy, or like when I join Sao Paulo here, the first thing I look at and say, right, how many defenders do we have? How many people are actually good at defending? And then I try to improve it, because I think you can make big gains because everyone has to defend in their own way in the position they play in. And it's very important to develop winning mentality through that. So if you go back to winning your 1v1 duel, and if you win 7 out of the 11, we've got a good chance of winning, and trying to make each 1v1 very personal, that becomes something you can judge at half-time at the end of the game. Did you win? And that means that there's both sides of the game. Now, I think that what's really, really important is that each player learns a little bit more about defending, because I believe in the saying, I think it's a Wenger or a Don Howe saying that, you attack from the back and you defend from the front. So like Danny says, everyone's involved. But I was a winger when I was at Charlton as a young kid, and Neil Banfield was one of the coaches then, and obviously Terry Wesley, who worked with, who's working with Danny. So in terms of how they taught me to defend, because I hated defending as a kid, was how to block space and how to block passing lines and how to just shorten the pitch. And once they broke that down for me, defending became much easier. I was never a great defender. I was a boy that was a winger who loved to dribble and cross and play 1v1. And defending was never taught to me in a nice way. But defending different for each position and different for each person. But I think that you can, how you break it down for a young player and how you describe, and one bit of advice I'd maybe give out is you can link how someone defends for the team 100% to how much they want to win personally and how much they want the team to win. And I think that's a winner with young players. Okay, well, obviously you don't want to win if you're not willing to help us win the ball back, you're not willing to help us shorten the pitch, or you're not willing to help us press. So I think they're little words. That's why I say communication is everything in football. How clever you are at putting across a message, understanding how a young player will receive that message, understanding how each individual person might receive that message. So I think that's really important. But yeah, for me, 100%, we can be guilty of neglecting it. But in every practice that you work on 1v1 attacking, someone's got to defend. So there's a beautiful chance if you work with a co-coach to bounce off each other. And have one coach one aspect and one the other. But having spoken to me before, that my belief on football is the ability to play 1v1, but players thinking always in the 2v1. So whether that's going to help your mate with or without the ball, and the ability to make sure that no matter who you come up against, that you can have a positive effect in winning that 1v1. So it's something that I'm thinking about constantly at the moment, because we're constantly talking about developing character and personality, and there's people that say you cannot develop it. I think there is, but it's based on the environment that the player starts his football career in, that you can improve it.
Interesting. So that leads us nicely on to our next question then. So what are you looking for when scouting younger players, traits, tendencies, techniques, etc.? So look, when boys coming into you, given to you by the recruitment officer, whatever, what sort of things are you looking for? Mickey, you go first on that one.
I think I'm looking for personality. When I say personality, I'm not talking personality shows its way in various ways, but I'm looking for someone that really wants to play the game, has a real enthusiasm for the game, so you're not having to prompt them to play. You're looking for movement mechanics for sure in a younger player. You're looking for because movement mechanics make everything come together much quicker. If you're working an 8-ball domination exercises, a boy that has good movement mechanics will pick things up very, very quickly. So I think you're looking for that. But I think you're looking for a personality, enthusiasm to play the game, and then you have to make that call of whether you think you can take this boy on a journey, whether you can go on that journey with him. And that's again another advice I would give to coaches working in academies, that when a trialist comes in, you have to really buy into the journey with the player. Do you think that the journey is a long journey? And if it isn't, there will be another club for that player, I believe, and another club, another circumstance where they can go on a journey with them. Because that's very, very important to player development, that they have people around them that believe in their journey and can kick them on. And you talk about players being released from one club, go into another club and go and do fantastically well. That's not because they're not good enough to play in one club or another. It's just a different set of circumstances. I worry about that now in the EPP, where a boy signs for a club and he cannot leave unless his dad's got the money to buy him out, or a club that has, because we all know that it's about pathway and having. And this is why I say that the adults have to open the doors, because it's just about the journey and continuing on the journey without too many bumps. I think you can put 1 or 2 bumps in the road that you can put in there to help the player develop. But the most important thing is the player's playing, that he's happy, that he sees himself moving forward. And so when you're looking at a young player, movement mechanics first, personality in terms of does he really want to play the game, and then the decision of marrying it together with, do you think there's a pathway here, and do you think that you can go on a journey with the player? Because if you do think that, it will be a wonderful journey.
Danny, your thoughts on that, mate?
Yeah, I mean, one of my sort of hobbies is psychology, and boys that are coming in, and they've got to have a growth mindset for me. They've got to have that ability to look at a situation, as I said, get things wrong, as I mentioned earlier on in the chat, and see that as a learning opportunity, and not get too frustrated and too angry. I mean, still want to get better, show desire to want to get better, but really understand that for them to get to where they want to get to, they're going to have a lot of opportunities to make mistakes, and they're going to make mistakes, and it's how they bounce back from that, how resilient they are. Do they see this as an opportunity to really go and work hard and become a better player, or do they find it tough? And sport's not for everyone, just like all business isn't for everyone, because you're going to come up against hurdles, and we've all seen that illustration of the ideal journey from A to B is a nice straight line and a nice sort of clean hill, and then the reality is he's going to fall down holes, and he's going to have to climb up trees, and they're going to have to do things that are going to take them right outside their comfort zone. So for me, there's a big personality side of it comes into it, and a real resilience to, you know what, I want to be a football player and I want to improve, I want to get better, and I understand that, you know what, these are the things that I'm going to have to do it. Now, obviously, depending what age group they come in, will depend whether they've already got those skills or whether they need an environment where you're going to hone those skills so you can give them that freedom. Because when they come to you, you'd like to think that your recruitment department have bought you a player that's got potential or got attributes, and then it's down to you to try to kind of implement all the polishing.
Nice one, excellent. So, just a couple more questions, lads. I know you guys are both very busy men. So, just how do you get kids to practice like they would do in a real game? What sort of strategies would you use to try and, motivate your kids? And bearing in mind, what advice would you give to grassroots coaches as well? Bearing in mind, you guys obviously work at a top level, it might be a little bit easier for you guys. Danny, do you want to go first with that?
Yeah, I'll do the academy side of it first. I mean, we've all played under good coaches, and one of the best sort of quotes, if you want, I ever had is you need to work harder in training when you're doing a game, because at the end of the day you want to be able to go into a game situation and be able to not be comfortable, because we all know that depending on the opposition will depend on how comfortable you are, but you shouldn't come across anything that's going to be too physically demanding to you, whether that's going into extra time or that mentality side of having to deal with penalties. So the sessions that I like to try and put on and create a real high tempo, and they're physically demanding, they're mentally demanding in the types of practices that we do, that the players have really got to be focused, they've got to be switched on. Mick said about reactions earlier, and making sure they're reacting quickly and efficiently to what we're doing. Obviously balancing that up with opportunities to work on their technical side of the game. But we all know it's almost impossible to recreate a game situation unless you play the game. So as many opportunities to get these boys in situations where it's competitive. We talked about winning earlier, and making sure the boys have got something they want to play for within the training sessions, because I think that's key. Lots of sessions you see, there's possessions put on, they don't score a goal. There's no goals for them to be able to score. They're non-directional. The boys don't really understand, right, okay, so I've made 10 passes, what does that mean? And you know what all the boys are like these days, they want to win everything. So whether it's putting in a passing rule, bit of a directional practice, it's making sure that it's competitive, because that's when you really start to see those dominant players coming out. With regards to grassroots, as we alluded to earlier, with the limited time that they have, the best thing for them to do is to let these kids play games and get them in a situation where you put the facility on and you facilitate the match for them and get them playing, because the more and more they play, the more and more it will relate itself to the game that they play on a Saturday or a Sunday.
Mickey, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story out of a terrible or really bad moment when I was at Liverpool with the under-23 squad. We'd gone through a bad moment of losing a couple of games, which was unlike us on the bounce, and from that become a beautiful moment, because we had a conversation with the players about, okay, what environment, what's changed, what do we want to get back? And what changed at the time was players moving all over the place, whether it be loans, first team, and maybe some minds had moved. But what they'd decided in training was that they wanted to be more competitive. And everyone talks about the Scouts mentality, but it's really unbelievable. I feel privileged to have worked in it. And what the young boys come up with was that in any training game, if you was ever 3-0 down, they wanted us to stop the game, and they wanted the other team to run, to have a forfeit. And I was a bit sceptical about it, because it's one of them. It's like, wow, it's a bit barbaric. But I tell you, I only used it once or twice in a whole year after that, and it was their role. So whenever we were ever 3-0 down in a 7v7, 5v5, 11v11, could be a 6v6, 4-goal game, they were never 3-0 down. It only happened one or twice. So you're talking about over 100, maybe 150 sessions. So they set themselves a rule or a boundary that sort of brought everything together. Everything we've been speaking about today in terms of mentality, intensity to training, focus to training, the winning mentality, the players brought it. So I would always lose 2 games now if I was ever going to get that back, in terms of having a group that's regulate themselves and give them that. And in terms of running, it was more like short, sharp doggies. It was difficult, because then you have to go straight back on the pitch and start again. And if you were ever 3-0 down again, and it wasn't the other team playing pity on them, because it becomes very competitive then, because the other team want to score that third goal. And I just felt that group was special, and that's why players came out of that group, and that's why so many have gone on to make debuts and around Liverpool's first team now and playing. But I think that's something that you can use with any age group. I don't think, I would say in grassroots it's probably more the case. And that's why I say setting the boundaries for training and the environment is so important. And there's so many things that go into being a top coach. And I don't want anyone listening to think that you need to have these things all at the same time. You get these things with experience, and you've got to go on your little journey or your journey as a coach and pick up things as you move. But in personality, to inspire is really important, and setting the boundaries of training is really important. Because until I come across that group of players at Liverpool and they come up with that idea to raise their own standards in the session, I'd never thought of that myself. And what a fantastic idea that them young players come up with.
Very interesting. Guys, thank you very much. It's been fantastic. Danny Searle, Mickey Beale, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.